Those were the days.
Hey y'all, Justin Lee Harold here with another edition of Those Are the Days Extended. And today we are going to talk about one of my favorite, personal favorite characters. She is very controversial, but I think ultimately she's very, very well liked and appreciated, I think, over the years. And that, of course, I am talking about the Chelsea Brady, played by Rachel Melvin here. And to start off, I'm actually going to take you back to June 11th, 2009, when Chelsea Brady actually said goodbye to Salem. She sort of wrapped up, and this, of course, is Rachel Melvin. Played her just beautifully over the years. She did Chelsea all in all. It was a very short time on the show. It was about a 4.5, maybe close to 5 year run on the show that we had of Chelsea, and they just again they packed a lot into this character, which we're going to get into. But this is actually when she sort of decided to leave Salem. A lot of that was around the fact that I think at the time Billy had gotten into this tragic car accident, and she needed a lot of therapy, and she needed sort of someone there. So Chelsea sort of decided to go to London and help out her mom, and then she gets engaged to Max. They soon follow to London, where they have been since the beginning. We know in sort of real time in the present show that her and Max are together. They're married. They just had a baby, and they've just sort of welcomed Bo back. So yeah, I kind of wanted to break this up a little bit because I think Chelsea is such, again, she was only on for a short period of time in the scope of days, but I think she's such an impactful character, and she's a character that the writers took her from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so I kind of wanted to just highlight her time in Salem, and I broke it up into sort of three parts into how sort of she was introduced to the show versus how she sort of left here in this state as sort of an accomplished career woman, sort of finding love and sort of leaving Salem in a better place than she either found it, or that she sort of, her duration over those 5 years, she started a lot of things up, but I think ultimately she sort of found herself in the process, and I think the writers really found who this character was by the time it was time for her to leave. But yeah, just to sort of start off, when Chelsea first came onto the scene, I don't know if you guys remember this, but this actually started out before we saw Chelsea. And what was happening was, if you guys remember the Stan storyline, where Sammy was dressing up as Stan and sort of wreaking havoc and sort of taking direction from Andre Demira. And, she was at a low place in her life. So she was sort of wreaking havoc all over Salem and doing things that would have definitely sort of, got her run out of Salem or sort of got her banned from the family. But it was such an interesting, daring sort of storyline that they came up with for to sort of cover or deal with Allison Sweeney's maternity leave. And again, we reference it a lot of times, the infamous Stan storyline, and props to Dan Wells for that. But it sort of started here before we even met Chelsea. And one of the things that Stan was doing or carrying out for Andre was this idea that the Demiras had taken Georgia, who is Bo and Billy's daughter, of course, who we eventually learned to be Chelsea, was that she actually didn't die back in the bayou in Louisiana during the Maison Blanche storyline, that she had actually lived, and the Demiras sort of took her and put her in hiding or placed her with someone else. And Andre was using Stan to sort of kind of taunt Bo and Billy, basically, with this idea that Georgia was still alive, and we're gonna send Bo and Billy on this wild goose chase to sort of find her. And it was it sort of was not successful in a way. And ironically, if you remember back then, on one of their missions to sort of find Georgia, they came across Andre, of course, and they came across a fake Georgia who was actually played by Rachel Melvin. So before she actually came on the show of Chelsea and came on the show as a character of Chelsea, if those of you remember, she was actually recast because the original Chelsea, which I wish I had a picture of, but was originally played by Mandy Musgrave for I want to say the first 6 months of the show. Then Rachel sort of took over the show. Rachel took over the role. So if interesting, if you remember back then, it started, Rachel sort of premiered as a fake Georgia / Chelsea first. And then, of course, when Mandy left, she sort of came on as the Chelsea that we sort of know and love, and that sort of carried on these storylines. So yeah, at the time it was, she was the fake Georgia, so it turned out she wasn't Georgia, so Bo and Billy sort of returned to Salem, depleted, and sort of really wondering if their daughter was actually still alive, or was this just a plot from the Demiras to really mess with them and play with their minds and just kind of send them on a goose chase to torture them. So that was kind of that was kind of the climate then. Um, and that's when we sort of are introduced to this woman. And I remember this clear as day. This is one of those storylines that I remember as soon as it sort of started. It started with Abigail. Billy, I remember, came over to Jennifer's house to visit with Jennifer. They're old friends, and she's embracing Abigail, and then Abigail says, "Oh, I'd like you to meet my best friend, Chelsea Benson." And I remember this clear as day, where Mindy Musgrave, who was again playing Chelsea at the time, she goes in to shake Billy's hand to say, "Hi, nice to meet you." Billy says, "Oh, Chelsea, I've always loved that name." And I remember and again, Billy is played by Julie Pinson at this point. This is when she sort of came on and took over the role. Um, but the camera sort of stopped on Julie's face as Billy, and it sort of lingered for a minute. And right then, I remember it popping into my head like, "Oh, is she going to be Georgia? Oh, or is this a possibility she could be Georgia?" And it was funny because it seemed like we were sort of letting that die, or putting that on the back burner because of how unsuccessful their missions were to find her Georgia, even if she was alive. So it was this interesting thing of like, oh my God, are they making this girl who we know as Chelsea, or we've seen now as Chelsea, as Abigail's best friend? Are they going to make her Georgia, kind of a thing? So I remember that popping into my head. It's one of those scenes that is like clear as day when I think about it. But again, she was eventually Georgia, but they sort of kept the name Chelsea and sort of went with that. But sort of sparked this instant kind of connection between Billy and Chelsea. And funny thing was, it sort of sparked a little bit of a rivalry because at the time, what was also going on was Patrick Lockhart was in the picture, and he was staying with Jennifer at the time, and Chelsea was sort of developing a crush on him. And so when she would come over to hang out with Abigail, she would had this sort of wild crush on Patrick, and even though he was older than them, she sort of set her sights on him in a weird way. And so when Billy came into the picture, Patrick and Billy had their thing. And so it was this weird, before Chelsea knew who she was or knew she was related to Billy, they sort of had this weird sort of rivalry for Patrick, which was interesting, where Chelsea just automatically disliked Billy, had liked her previously when she met her and thought she was interesting, but sort of disliked her because Patrick had eyes for Billy, and they were sort of starting their thing. So this weird sort of mother-daughter rivalry thing, which actually continues on into other facets, Nick Fallon and all that later on. But yeah, that's how they sort of met, and we were introduced to, again, at the time, it wasn't Chelsea Brady, it was Chelsea. Her name was Chelsea Benson, and again, she was Abigail's best friend. That's how we were introduced to teen Abigail's best friend. So what happens is, sort of moving along, if you remember, Jennifer, Abigail, Chelsea's parents, they are sort of celebrating Abigail's, I believe, 17th birthday. And they're out and they're coming home, and Jennifer and Abigail are in one car and Chelsea and her parents are in another car. They actually get into an accident. And Billy is sort of first on the scene, I think, as a bystander. I can't remember if she officially was back as a cop at this point, but she arrives on the scene. I think Chelsea's foster adopted dad is killed. It's delayed. The mother is sort of there, and Billy's sort of comforting the mother and waiting for sort of EMS to come. And the mom, sort of, in and out of it, sort of senses she's dying, basically asks Billy to sort of take care of her daughter. Not necessarily knowing or having a relationship with Billy, but it was one of those things of, watch after her, please keep her safe. My last thoughts as I lay here sort of dying or of my daughter, and keeping her safe, sort of thing. So it set up this weird thing where the parents die, unfortunately. Chelsea is sort of in this weird state of being an orphan, but she's a late teen. So Billy, sort of feeling responsible for her, decides that she wants to be her foster mom. And then that sort of sets up their dynamic originally. And then of course later we actually find out that they're mother and daughter, and that creates, this weird sort of not rivalry, I say, but it creates this mother and daughter tension that we saw with Billy and Chelsea. And I think one of the things that they were trying to do is to recreate what we saw between Kate and Billy back in the day, back in the 90s, when Billy found out that Kate was her mom. There was a lot of anger, there was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of just clashing of these two women back then. And I think they were trying to recreate that here with Billy sort of in the place of Kate, and then Chelsea sort of in the place of Billy as she was back then. And then once they found out they were mother and daughter, there was this tension, or especially from Chelsea, of like, where were you? My adopted parents were great, but I was raised here in Salem, sort of right under you guys' nose, and no one even knew that I was here. And, all of that sort of mother-daughter growing pains that sort of come with it, that they were sort of going through and experiencing. And that was sort of how we were introduced to Chelsea, and sort of the first iteration of her. Again, she was Abigail's best friend. She was not a bad girl per se, but she was a little bit of a troublemaker. She was, she was the one who would try and, get Abigail to stay out past curfew or sneak out. Again, she was into older guys, into Patrick, and sort of became a little bit obsessed with getting him. So that was sort of the vibe of Chelsea. She was a bit of a troublemaker, kind of a shit stirrer, kind of. But I think she had a good heart. At least she wasn't a flat out villain or a real mean girl. I think there was sort of a sweetness to her once you got to know her, sort of thing. And so that was sort of the dynamic of her coming into the show, and then immediately putting her juxtaposition to Abigail, but also putting her in the orbit of both Billy and Bo, of course, and especially Billy, with taking over sort of as her foster mom before they found out that she was her mother, basically. Then sort of what comes next after she sort of gets established into being Chelsea and sort of taking over the sort of Brady name. And I'm going to put this picture up, and this, of course, is sort of what we found to be the new sort of Brady family. We have Bo and Hope here. We have newfound daughter Chelsea here. We, of course, have Zach in the middle. We have Sean there on the left. And, of course, here he is with Mimi, who, if you remember at the time, this is when Sean and Mimi were together, and they were eventually married, a short-lived marriage. But, again, this is, at this point in time, just to give you a reference point, this was the Brady family. Again, Bo, Hope, Chelsea, Sean, Sierra, of course, wasn't the thought. She came later on, and then baby Zach, and then, of course, Mimi as Sean's wife and daughter-in-law. And again, this is where they took the character sort of off the rails. Of course, we know that she accidentally kills Zach in a car accident. Zach gets out of his bed. He goes to the door. He sort of goes out of the house and finds himself into the street. Chelsea, who is driving a car she isn't supposed to, because she's had a couple accidents in the past. So I think at the time her license was revoked. I believe she may have been even like looking at her phone, or I don't know if she was texting at the time, but I think she was looking at her phone at the time. Wasn't looking where she was going. Accidentally hits and kills her brother. Not knowing, again, it's her brother at first. She thinks she hit someone. She isn't sure. She, panics, whatever. Unfortunately, Zach is killed. And honestly, I'm not sure if we've ever got a definitive reason why they decide to go with this storyline. I think it's weird in a way, because I think the character of Zach brought on so much storyline with the sort of Zach and JT switched at birth storyline that sort of also gave us, the evil Lexi part of it. And it was a good sort of a couple years of storyline that they invested into the show and invested into bringing this character full circle back to Bo and Hope, back to being a Brady. And so to decide to sort of kill him, I never really understood that. I never understood if there was more behind it. As we eventually know, it doesn't even break up Bo and Hope losing Zach. So I'm not, again, not 100% sure why they went in this direction. I don't know if it was something just to give them a really big storyline in their marriage and break things up. It was also to sort of give Chelsea a hurdle to get over, I guess. I'm not sure, but in a weird way, it's also when it comes to Chelsea, I think as much as people liked her, it's also one of those things where there's like a slight asterisk next to her character, a bit of like, oh, she killed Zach, and you're kind of, she didn't mean to do it on purpose. It was an accident, but it always creates just a little slight bit of awkwardness whenever they mention her or they talk about Zach or, you know, but not thankfully, but she hasn't been on the show in a while. And last time we saw her was for Victor's funeral, which was a lovely surprise. And I think she's about due for a comeback. I'd love to see Rachel come back to the show and come back for a storyline. But yeah, I think we never definitively got a reason as to, or at least the powers that be, why they want to sort of kill Zach off in this storyline. But this is where, again, they sort of took Chelsea sort of across the line, some would say, in addition to the fallout of Zach being killed. It put a wedge, of course, with Bo and Hope, where Bo and Chelsea were sort of on one side, and then Hope and Sean were on the other. It split Bo and Hope up a little bit with the grief. A lot of that had to do with the fact that Bo originally was protecting Chelsea before he even knew that the person she hit was Zach. Then when he sort of put two and two together, realized it was Zach, he also wanted to protect his newfound daughter that he just found, a year or so ago, and sort of was very invested into keeping her safe and keeping her out of jail. And that, of course, put Hope on the offensive and just kind of not rip them apart again. Again, they didn't divorce because of this. They sort of separated for a little bit of time. And again, like I said, it put sort of Bo and Chelsea in one area on one side, and then sort of Sean and Hope on another. So it definitely sort of wrecked their family dynamic a bit. And then Chelsea sort of, she was regretful for what she did. She, it was, again, a complete accident. She didn't mean to do it. But she sort of took the opportunity that Bo and Hope were on this break or were grieving, and she sort of trying to use that as an opportunity to get Bo and Billy back together. She did things like, I remember Hope was like emailing Bo about the status of their relationship and, what did he want to do? Did he want to give them another try? Was it too far gone for them? And sort of Chelsea intercepted those emails and pretended to be Bo and basically responded that, pretending as Bo, that he wanted a divorce from Hope because of the grief and everything. And sort of when it all came out, this is when sort of Bo turned on even Chelsea. And it made her sort of a little bit more of a pariah for a little while. Again, not sure where the genesis, again, of this storyline came from. Not sure why they decided to kill Zach. I think we got a lot of mileage out of it, not in terms of the Chelsea character, of course, moving forward, but also I think it was more of a standout storyline for Christian Alfonso. I think she took the leads here as the sort of grieving mother, and we all remember the infamous sort of scream she let out that she's sort of known for when finding out that Zach was killed. So it became more of, I think, a storyline to really show off Kristen and her acting skills, and she, of course, was phenomenal in it. But yeah, not sure of what the lasting effect of this storyline was supposed to be. But yeah, it definitely sort of put Chelsea on, it made her sort of the town pariah, or at least the Brady family pariah, for a long time. Then we sort of have this arc where Chelsea sort of, tries to get her life together and do the right thing. And she actually really has this really beautiful, I think, redemption arc. And it's very, very much of a slow burn. And it's not just that she does one thing and she's sort of forgiven. It's just this sort of series of events, and I'm going to sort of I'll go through them quickly now if you guys remember them. One of it was that Chelsea was actually the one to reveal Claire's paternity. So it was a little bit of a mess of how she found out and how it came out, but ultimately it was Chelsea who did it, and that sort of softened Sean to her, basically, because Sean was furious with her and wanted nothing to do with her, and sort of wrote her off as his sister. So that sort of helped with mending that relationship between her and Sean. She also, one of the things that sort of solidified that was when after Claire's paternity came out, Sean and Belle, of course, were on the run, and Chelsea sort of volunteered to put herself in danger and at risk of being arrested. She was ended up smuggling money to them when they were on the run. So that was sort of like, a good deed or a sacrifice that she made to show Sean, especially, that she was sorry for what she did and the trouble she caused, and sort of wanted to have a close relationship with him. And this was the beginning of the Chelsea Brady sort of redemption arc. Another thing that happened is she became a transplant donor for Beau when he was having pancreatic issues. So that was sort of little storyline here with sort of getting Chelsea sort of back in good graces with Beau. There was the point in time where she helped take down a campus rapist who had attacked Stephanie, her cousin. So that was a big thing. Then it was these last two, I just think two of my favorites to sort of solidify who Chelsea eventually became and who she grew into. If you guys remember, they sort of roped her into the Theo storyline and the storyline with the Carvers, where they had Chelsea sort of figuring out what she wanted to do. She, was a student at university, at Salem U. Then she did the flight attendant thing with Jeremy and Chet for a while. And then she sort of decided on, while she was doing community service, that she kind of wanted to do something in the medical field. And she actually, if you guys remember this, she actually became a behavioral therapist, and she actually worked with Theo Carver, and that was her ended up being a lot of her storyline, her closeness to Theo and her closeness to Lexi and Abe. Sort of working with Theo, he was just diagnosed with autism and being on the spectrum, and her sort of being able to relate to him and him to her, and sort of her sort of navigating Lexi and Abe through Theo's challenges at the time. So that was sort of a big step forward for her in changing her into a different person. And then last but not least is this sort of definitive, very much end to this redemption arc, is when really Hope really truly forgave Chelsea. And it started with it was a slow burn, of course. It was, Hope didn't want to see Chelsea. She didn't want to have anything to do with her. She wanted her in jail to, she's Beau's daughter, so I got to learn to sort of exist with her and tolerate her and put up with her, basically, to she's changing as a person. I can be around her and it's fine, but we're never going to be close, to, I think Hope sort of saw the person that Chelsea was becoming and how she was turning her life around, and sort of the revelation with Claire and wanting to help Sean Douglas. That really, I think, went a long way with Hope toward really moving toward forgiving Chelsea. And this sort of still here is taken from one of the last Horton Christmases, where Hope presented Chelsea with her own Christmas ornament. And it was them hanging the ornaments as they usually do, and Chelsea's putting hers next to Zach's, and sort of this is them sort of embracing afterward. And I remember this was when Hope truly sort of forgave Chelsea and was moving on. And then it blossomed into this beautiful relationship where Hope, sort of Billy was off canvas, so Hope became the surrogate mom to Chelsea in this interesting way, and it sort of showed their relationship sort of full circle. And I remember when Chelsea was leaving, she had these beautiful scenes with Hope and Chris Alfonso, and where Hope was telling her, she considers Chelsea her daughter, and that she was proud of her for making the decision to sort of leave Salem to go help Billy and help her mom, and that was a sacrifice. And she was always welcome here in her home, and she always considered her a daughter. So that was sort of the final sort of transformation from where Chelsea started to where she eventually ended. But like I said, there is this weird sort of, as much as I love Chelsea and as much as people liked her and like Rachel Melvin's portrayal of her, like I said, there's always been this weird sort of asterisk there when it comes to Zach and sort of trying to navigate that. I think it's benefited from the fact that Chelsea hasn't been on the scene in so long. So it when she is mentioned, she's mentioned in a lovely way, in a positive way. But yeah, it'd be interesting to sort of see her around nowadays. We know she's still with Max and she has the baby. And again, I think it was such a breath of fresh air to have Rachel Melvin come back during Victor's funeral and sort of reconnect with people. I think it was really lovely to see. So yeah, I think ultimately people really do love and appreciate this character. And I think they've seen sort of where we started with her to where she ended up. And so yeah, I'm one of those people who would love to see more of Chelsea on the scene. So yeah, fingers crossed. I know I think these new writers are showing that they're very interested in bringing people back and exploring new storylines with family and sort of characters who are maybe not being Salem but do have some story left in them to tell or they can bring back. So yeah, that was sort of our trip down memory lane to explore the character of Chelsea Brady. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. That was this week's edition of Those Were Days Extended. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Those were the